Hi, everyone. I think we are live, so I just want to let you know that before the meeting starts. Welcome. Hello, Michelle.
Good evening, Susan. How are you?
Doing well. We'll get underway. I think we're just waiting for, let's see, probably for Bradley and Sarah.
Hi, everyone. It's Nancy.
Hey, Nancy.
Hi, can you hear me?
I can hear you just fine. I just want to let you know we're live already. We're streaming.
All right. Thank you. Michelle, thank you for all your help.
You're welcome. I hope you got all the answers you needed.
Yeah, I did. Thanks.
You're welcome.
Welcome, Bill. I just want to let everyone know. Hi, Ken. Everyone, as you're joining, we are live.
Hey, everybody. Good to see you. I understand we are live.
Welcome, Sarah. Just want to let you know we're live.
Okay.
I think we'll give our last committee member just a minute here to join us.
Good.
And as we're waiting, Chris, if you hear me, Chris, can you resend the link to Michael Petiti? Make sure Michael has the link as well. Oh, there he is. Never mind, Chris. Michael's here.
So there's Bradley. I think everyone from the committee is here. So if it's okay, we'll get underway. Welcome, everyone. We are streaming live right now. I'd like to welcome everyone to the May 12th Radnor Township School District Virtual Finance Committee meeting. Let's see, with us tonight, we have a number of administrators. I think that they'll be talking about various items on our agenda. But we'll start off with administrative remarks from our business administrator, Ms. Dico.
So yes, we do have a variety of people who are with us today. The reason that they're here is because a large portion of our conversation this evening is going to be around the 2020-21 proposed final budget. So I've asked them to join us in case there's questions in their specific areas.
And then just to also manage streaming, I've told the administrators, feel free to turn your cameras off, because then what they're streaming can be the committee faces, the tiles, but feel free either way. But that's one of the reasons why we try to do that. So when we stream it out, it's not too large of a screen.
Okay, great. Michelle, do you have any administrative remarks yet, or you just want to get underway?
Let's just get underway.
Okay, with that, Mr. Petiti, do we have any public comment?
Yes, we do.
Okay,
This is from Laura Ferran. On the agenda, it indicates that the long-held 8th grade Sandy Hill trip is being eliminated. I can certainly understand not having it this September. That makes perfect sense, just as we did in 2001 after the terror attacks of 9/11. The trip was held in May of that year. Our kids are navigating a whole new world and are going to be losing many of the foundations of tradition that they and their Radner siblings have always known. To take away Sandy Hill now and so abruptly. Why? Why not at least let our current 6th and 7th graders have a chance to enjoy this really important pilgrimage? I'm hoping that you will reconsider this decision, or at least being willing to explore the option of a 3-phase out so that our kids can look forward to the experience with their entire grade. That's it.
thank you, Mr. Petiti. Is there any other public comment?
That is all.
All right, great, thanks. So I'm hoping, did the committee have an opportunity to look at our minutes? Does everyone accept the April 21st Finance Committee meeting minutes as written? We're good? I'll take a head nod there. Super, great. All righty, so then let's get right underway with our agenda items. I think all of you are starting to get used to, we start off with our board agenda action items. These are the items that we will typically see on, often see on the consent agenda, but some of these, you know, are specific. What I'd like to call out is we have our monthly report. We would like to thank the Right at School and the Johnson family for their generous donations in support of our families. And then we're going to have 2 items on our agenda for the board meeting that revolve around the Delaware County Community College. One of them will be the acceptance of, excuse me, the Delaware County Community College's annual budget. This will be a roll call vote, and there was a packet attached to tonight's agenda for that. And our Radnor share of the annual budget is $1,461,991. This is approximately a $3,700 increase from last year, if you had an opportunity to look in your packet. And then the other item that will be on our agenda, pardon me, is a resolution reappointing Delaware County Community College Board Trustee Bernice Clark Dickerson for a 6-year period, July 1st, 2020 through June 30 of 2026. And this will also be a roll call vote. So I'm opening the floor. I don't know if any of you have questions for Michelle about either of these 2 items that we will take action on at the board meeting. Nancy, Bradley, Sarah, if you have a question, please feel free to just raise your hand. Yeah, Nancy, go ahead.
The only question I have related to the Delaware County Community College is that the amount that we anticipated in our 2021 budget, Michelle?
It is. I actually get information from Delaware County Community College, usually at the end of November. They give me their preliminary number. And so the number that they're representing here in this document is exactly what I had back in November.
Yeah, so I don't know if there's any other questions. All righty. All right, well, so then we'll see that on our board item, on our board agenda for action. And then I don't think it's any surprise that the bulk of our meeting tonight is going to be a discussion of the 2020-2021 budget update. And Michelle, I'll let you take that away.
Give me 1 second. I need to get to the right spot here.
Michelle, are you going to be doing a screen share?
That's what I'm trying to do.
Okay, let me see if I can pull up. Are you pulling up the budget scenarios book?
Yes,
Okay, are you having trouble?
I'm having trouble.
All right, let me see if I can pull it up. Just a moment.
Okay, thank you.
Let's see. How'd that work?
That's there. Thank you very much. I apologize for that computer, little bit of struggle there. So some of the things that we've been talking about administratively is different ways on how to try and balance this budget. Unfortunately, as we looked at some of the things in the area of expenses that we could reduce, we also had to take a look at revenues, because with the pandemic that's currently occurring and COVID-19, there's various areas where we anticipate that we are going to see reductions in our revenues. And what that did was that actually made the deficits that we looked at the last time back in April, that actually made those deficits larger. So when we look at these scenarios, there's a couple of things that we want you to keep in mind. First and foremost, that all of those deficits have been increased by $500,000. And that $500,000 represents about $1.3 million worth of changes that were made to the revenues. And that's been netted against the savings from our bond refinancing. So that's where that $500,000 comes from. So keep that in mind as we look at these scenarios. So when we look at the first scenario, the first column, it's a 2.6% tax increase, which is the maximum allowed amount by the Act 1 index. And the way that we looked at balancing that was using the additional federal support dollars that we're going to be receiving from the CARES Act. That's something new that was enacted just recently, and it gets passed through to school districts because of the COVID-19 pandemic. There's personnel adjustments and reductions, and I want to explain that that's related to paraprofessionals. We believe that there are paraprofessionals, and most of these positions are currently vacant. There is paraprofessionals who do one-on-one services with students, and or are what we call access aides, which means that they're available to students if students have a need. And we believe that we can reduce some of those positions, and with many of them, with some being vacant and possibly the rest of them through attrition. We have technology reductions of $270,000. That is directly related to Dr. McCook's purchasing of technology equipment this year in order to be distributed to students and families during our closure. We'll also have a savings that will happen again next year in 2020, 21, 22, directly related to those purchases. Dr. McCook actually did 2 years of purchases in this current year in anticipation of the closure and being able to distribute those those technology equipment pieces out to students. Then there's the high school and middle school sub-reductions. And those sub-reductions, I can have Dan Bechtel talk a little bit about those. I think he'll be able to explain it much better than myself. But those reductions came about as discussion because of the closure currently. We're not using substitutes and we're doing online learning. So I'm going to ask Dan to talk a little bit about that once I go through all of these different things. And then there's Camp Sandy Hill. Camp Sandy Hill is something that we've been discussing, and I want to stress that none of these things have actually been removed from the budget. Currently, they're for discussion purposes, and any one of these things could end up coming off because perhaps maybe the board doesn't want to make the reduction. Then there's the use of the general fund balance. That also includes savings from the COVID closure. And then there's the additional use of the retirement rate stabilization fund. All of these scenarios that we had presented previously included using $500,000 of the retirement rate stabilization fund. We're suggesting that we use another $300,000 for a total of $800,000. So when you look at that 2.6% tax increase, you can see that we actually are able to cover the deficit. But keep in mind, it's more than likely that we will possibly see additional reductions for things like delinquent real estate taxes, perhaps maybe interest income, transfer taxes, interim taxes. We may see some additional reductions in that area. And of course, there's no capital. A transfer to the capital reserve fund is not included in this budget scenario that you see here. And then you can see if we go to a 2.4% tax increase, you taking into consideration all of those same figures, that's the yellow column that you see. You can see that again, we're able to cover the deficit, but again, there's no capital transfer over to Fund 32 from Fund 10, and there is likely to be additional decreases in our revenues. When you look at the 1.8% tax increase, we still have a shortfall of $255,937 in that scenario. That would require us to use additional fund balance, whether it be assigned or unassigned, or tax at a higher amount to cover that, or make reductions in order to be able to cover that. With the 1% tax increase, you can see that we still, when we're all done taking into account all of those different various scenarios, we still have a deficit of $879,000. And then if we look at the final column, that's a 0% increase. That has a deficit of $1,665,000. And again, the only options you have in order to cover those deficits are to raise taxes higher, to increase taxes, make reductions, or use some sort of fund balance. So Dan, can you explain a little bit how those staff reductions for subs for the middle school and the high school would work?
Certainly, I'd be happy to talk about that. So I think we spoke about this at the last Finance Committee meeting. We went and looked at the total costs for subs that the district uses. We also went and looked at the total number of subs used at the high school and the middle school over the past year, up until we were out in March. And then we went and identified how many subs we thought we could go down and still be able to manage students and ensure that students were learning. One of the things that is a benefit of our current online learning is that we really have teachers going and putting videos and posting activities and things like that on our LMS. At the high school for years, when I was the high school principal, we'd have teachers go and put lesson plans together for subs. And one of the things that became apparent in the last couple of years was that subs would go and get to school, and teachers would have said, all of my directions are already posted for my students on Schoology, please have them log in. I have detailed instructions on there. So thinking creatively about how we could go and save funds, knowing the current budget situation, we went and looked at a reduction. This is not a full reduction. We would still have 2 subs at the high school and 2 subs at the middle school that would show up every day. And we would have a floater sub that administrators could use to bounce between the 2 buildings based off of need. And we would use those 5 subs at the secondary level to go and realize a cost savings of $155,000. Administratively, I talked with Mr. Dukevich and Mr. Batchelor about this. In order for this plan to work, we would have to ensure that these subs would not be taken elsewhere. So by having these a cap on these subs at the high school and the middle school, we couldn't increase the number of subs at the elementary level by like 6 subs because that would eat into this savings. So so we would definitely put a structure in place to ensure that that we would stay status quo on the subs that we currently are using, but this would realize a savings of $155,000. Students at the high school and middle school would go to either LGI areas or to the library. They would have their device. We're very fortunate to have one-to-one devices at this time, and they would use those devices to access Schoology in the event of a individual teacher being out, and be able to work on the things this teacher posted on Schoology for them.
Michelle, how do you want to handle this? Do you want to see if anyone has questions for Dan, or do you have another administrator who you'd like to bring on to do some explanations? I really leave it to your good judgment.
So there's one thing I did realize that I missed when I was going over all of those reductions that we're bringing forward for consideration, and that was the conference reductions. So I'm going to ask Dan to give a little bit of an overview on that as well. Because there was a lot of thought that was put into how do we identify which conferences to reduce. So Dan, if you could go over that just briefly, I'd appreciate it. Certainly.
Mr. Dukevich and I went through conferences and spoke with the building principals and Dr. Kearney. One of the things we did was try to look at conferences that were not essential for this year, and push those conferences and those PD opportunities off. Anything that would be critical or that we needed to have, we kept in there. So we were able to realize another $51,000 worth of conference savings, and we still do have a conference budget. Again, this was just us taking a second look and seeing what, if we didn't go to a specific conference this year, what could we go to next year? What could we push off a year? And so it's us kicking the can down the road a little bit. The conferences that we reduced, we do not feel will have a negative impact on our students or our schools.
And I think one of the other things that we had talked about that Dan didn't mention is that we're currently looking at our conference request form and trying to get our conference request form and the conferences people are requesting to kind of perhaps line up with our curriculum cycle. So if someone is going to a conference, perhaps they're going to a conference because their area, their curricular area is under review and is likely to have a textbook update. So instead of sending the same people to the same conferences every year, look at how to rotate those so that conferences line up with the curriculum cycle and really seem to have a lot more value during that time.
Okay, so again, Sarah or Nancy or Bradley, do any of you have questions for Dan while we have him front and center? Sarah, Nancy? Okay, no. Sarah, why don't you go ahead?
Dan, I think you said this, I just want to make sure I was clear. The substitute teacher reductions, we would still have the 2 standing at Radnor High School, Radnor Middle School, and 1 floater. Is that what we currently have? I know there was a lot of back and forth this year because we haven't had enough substitutes, and I applaud your team for finding a creative way to deal with this. I hope it's efficient and effective, but I just want to know, is this a reduction from what we currently have, or it's just you're hoping you won't have to hire the extras we're often having to bring in?
So this is, we looked at fill rate. And so we did a reduction on our fill rate. We requested more subs than we actually got filled. But what we did was we looked at what we thought was manageable with the spaces that are already staffed, and looking at our existing staff. So these are, we would have 2 staff members, 2 substitutes at the high school, 2 at the middle school, and 1 floater. This would be a reduction of a little over 6 subs between the 2 buildings on average.
Okay.
And keep in mind that, this might be a bad idea. And it might play out differently at the high school than it would at the middle school. You're looking at trying to see what are some efficiencies we can find because of this new world we're living in and how we're using Schoology. I could see it working possibly better at the high school level because of the structure at our high school with an open campus that exists now that isn't a structure that we have, at the middle school. So we'd have to look at other places where students would go when we have a sub, be corralling kids. So there may need to be adjustments to this, but again, I also commend the creativity and the thinking outside the box, especially in a budget year that we're looking at this year.
So Dan and Ken and Sean, Michelle, all of you, I appreciate and I applaud it. And I actually think this is potentially a viable option at the high school and middle school. My only concern about including it as one of the items to close the budget gap is that we may end up with more absences next year if the virus, wreaks havoc. And so while I think it's a good idea, and I think it could potentially result in some savings, I'm a little nervous about having it in here as a stated budget gap mechanism. And that's only because, Dan, to your point, when you said before, you don't want to allocate more, you were kind of not thinking you would allocate those teachers to the to the elementary school because it would eat up the savings. And my concern is that we may have the level of absence and potential illness that would eat this up. So I still think we should be utilizing it. And I think it's Ken, to your point, it is a really creative way to maximize what we're learning this year about distance learning and the reality that most teachers have a day or two of lessons kind of ready to go in the event that they happen to be absent anyway. Practically speaking, that's what they do. So.
Yeah, and Susan, that was kind of why I was asking about what do we have currently this year. I think though, Dan's point about, for example, if the middle school, the idea is if you're using the LGI, 3 absences could be covered by moving all those students to one larger space with one sub. That's your idea, Dan, right? A sub can cover more classes at a time. Again, the issue being social distancing. We can't cram a bunch of kids into a room, a foot apart. So it'll be a work in progress.
That I understand, but it's also just if we end up having absences at the elementary school, utilizing Schoology, our learning management system, this isn't a viable option at the elementary school level. And I don't think any of you are suggesting that.
Yeah.
Correct.
All right, Michelle. So do you want to move? I don't know who you want to maybe have kind of queue up next to talk about what's here.
So I'd like to ask Jenny to talk a little bit about the paraprofessional adjustments that I talked about earlier. I think she can shed some light on how we think that we can handle that.
Hi everyone.
Welcome, Jenny.
Hi, how is everyone doing? So really, just like Michelle said, we have some of our para positions that were never filled last year. So there are a few of those. And also one of the things that we started working on last year, I started working on along with George, Dan, and Sean, looking at possibly working on some scheduling changes just to be more thoughtful about the structuring of our para support and having some of our paras do more of the shared services for our students within the educational environment. And this really does a couple of things. First of all, it utilizes our staff more appropriately. But one of the things it really does is it helps us to be less restrictive with our students, gives our students more of a chance to be independent in their classrooms. Now, this would not be for students that have in their IEPs that they need one-on-one services for specific areas of lessons or throughout the entire day based off of their significant needs. This is more for the students that need a little extra assistance within the classroom. But we feel that we would be able to, do this, even thinking of it as we move forward with our MTSS as well, just being more thoughtful. So that's, I hope I answered that. Open for questions. Did I say that correctly, Michelle? That's basically what we're thinking about. I think that's what I shared with you all along.
Yeah, and also we have to keep in mind when we think of our one-to-one paras, that is something that is usually the 99% of the time it is related directly to an IEP, and if that IEP should change and that student would no longer require that one-to-one, that's a position we would look to move away from. So that's besides the fact that we're looking at a situation where we're looking programmatically and we have some positions that are open, we've always been in the situation that a one-to-one pair is dictated by an IEP, and that if that should change, that is a position we would no longer need. And so that needs to be part of our how we operate when we look at one-on-ones. Is that fair, Jenny?
Absolutely. So we have a lot of support people out there that work with us. Our BCBA does a lot of that. Even our one-to-ones, sometimes they'll start out for the entire day. And then we start looking at certain classes that these students really don't seem to need a one-on-one. And sometimes it depends. It can be a less structured class or a more structured class, just depending on what the student's needs are. And we start to pull the para support back, which then opens up, if the IEP team determines it and says, for instance, a student no longer requires a one-to-one in the specials areas like art and music and gym and so forth, but really requires it for the assistance with the academics. So then that frees the para up, and we're really, Sean and I, especially at the elementary level, started looking at how we could get in and start working with the schedules and just be very thoughtful about where they would go and then assist in other grade levels. So that's really what this came down to.
And Susan, we're no longer seeing the chart. We're just seeing a list of meeting items. At least I am. If anybody else is similar to me.
Yeah, me too. I was looking at it like I wasn't sure why I was looking at that.
Oh, all right.
You're still sharing your screen and now it shows a list of your documents.
All right. I don't know why that went away.
You might just have to click on the document. You're highlighted the document we were just looking at, the budget scenarios.
Yeah, my computer says I'm still screen sharing, so let me stop it and restart it. I don't know what happened.
Yep.
Sorry about that. I got a little message. Someone asked me, let's see, I would like to share. Oh, that's not it. I would like to share. I'm trying to get to my, oh, there we go. Let me scroll to it. Hold on a second. I'll get you guys smaller.
While Susan's doing that, does anybody else have questions?
There we go. Is it back?
It's still just a list of your documents.
I don't know why it's not. I don't know why the screen share stopped. On my
No,
screen,
you're sharing your screen, but we see the file we just see a folder of documents for your finance committee.
and on my screen, I've opened it up, so I'm not sure what's going on. Let me try going back to it and see if I can it's the screen share that we were looking at, right?
Mm-hmm.
It was working because I was watching it for the longest time.
Yeah, it was. And sometimes what you need to do, Susan, is, and I could go back and do it, open it first before you go screen share, have it open, and then come back to the meeting, and then it should be a choice there, so it's already open for you.
Okay, well, I will do that. Why don't you guys keep talking while I do that? Let me just do this. I have it open on my screen.
So just a clarifying question, Jenny. So the personnel adjustment, that amount is all open positions currently that are not filled?
No, they're not all open. I believe, I'm just looking to see if, no, he's not there. I believe there were 3 or 4 that were open. And we definitely have some students that will not be in our school next year. So there are some things that we're knowing. So that's where some of that is coming from. And we'll continue to look at it as the year progresses, when we all come back into the buildings and start to, see the support that the students need and continue to work with our schedules to see what other options we can come up with as we move forward. But please, remember, these are all IEP team decisions. They're based off of data that we're collecting as teams, and also looking to be as least restrictive as possible. Because one of the most restrictive things we can do in a school building, although it's needed at times, is to have a student have a paraeducator with them at all times. So we do try through all different methods to remove that para support. We start by doing it with proximity. So sometimes the para will be right with the student, and then we just slowly start working it off where a para would be asked to move back, 4 feet, 5 feet, be in the room helping other students, and then take data on how many times that student really does need the assistance, bringing all that to an IEP team, the entire team, to sit down and make that decision. So that's been an ongoing thing. And I'm just going to say, we were doing a really great job, and, March hit. And so our data stopped. But we'll pick it back up and continue doing that as our teams are being trained to do so.
Are there any other questions for Jenny?
This is Bradley. I have a question. So
Sure.
I think you've covered this to some extent, but could you say a little bit more about how we know we don't need these positions next year, especially in terms of the idea that a lot of families may perceive that with remote learning, their students need a little bit extra last year to make gains that they otherwise would have gained in their goals?
So that's a great question. It is going to be difficult, like knowing exactly where these students are going to be when they come back. But we really feel that looking at the schedule, and we're going to be talking about this a little bit more moving forward when we find out exactly what it's going to look like when we do come back. We feel that we will have enough coverage to be able to take care of the students that we have at this point. We even looked at our early intervention students as well, and made those determinations based off of who we think are coming in. Some of those decisions haven't been totally made by those families, but we are kind of weighing on the heavy side just to make sure that we are okay with that. We had a lot of, like I said, we had some that weren't filled already, and we really didn't see the need growing. We actually saw it decreasing, especially with the fact of working collaboratively with our principals in our buildings to make sure that we are utilizing our schedule to the best of our ability. But at this point, we really do believe that that would be an absolute ability of ours for those 5 paras. That's an absolute ability.
Jenny, correct me if I'm wrong, because sometimes my memory doesn't serve me well, but I believe the situation is really that prior to this recent closure, prior to COVID-19, we would have been looking at additional beyond the 5 positions. We would have been looking at additional beyond the 5 only because how we're trying to make sure we're looking at our multiple tiered system of supports, which we've talked about, how we're going about MTSS at each building, how we're trying to make sure that our program is that least restrictive, and how can we be more efficient with the use of the aids and the use of the aids that we currently have. So that was an initiative that Jenny and George were already doing prior to all of this, and we adjusted it then. We adjusted it down exactly based on your question, Bradley, there are some unknowns now. So now as there's some unknowns, as we're moving into this MTSS, which we believe will be so beneficial for our students, we adjusted our expectations back down a little bit in case of that. Is that a fair representation, Jenny?
It's just what I had said before, where we were collecting data. We had some really good results. We were really moving forward. And when March hit, we had to stop. There are some students that were well on their way to have a lot of the different para support to be able to be pulled, because we were already starting to, like we call it, titrating those services back. And the students were doing really well. But at this point, and we had talked about this as a group before all this happened, but when this occurred and it continues, it wasn't just a 2-week, coming back after 2 weeks. And we have no idea what it's going to look like as we come back and what the support they're going to need coming back. So the students that we thought we were going to be able to do that with, I'm hopeful that we still will, but it's not something that we have the ability to do in the budget at this point. But moving forward, it would be great if we could do that, because it really would benefit them. But they may need that extra support when we come back in September.
And just to follow up briefly, I know you just stated that you have no idea what things are going to look like when we come back, and I accept that. But to some extent, we're 2 months out of 3 of an extended closure of the school buildings and a suspension of in-person learning. Have you been hearing anything from families or from your educators that might indicate some other areas where, sure, maybe we can bring these para positions down a little bit, but are there any other areas in which you might anticipate needing some growth or additional expenditures in the fall, just based on what you're hearing from 2 months of the situation?
So as we look at special ed, one of the things that we really have to do when the students come back, we're definitely going to be doing assessments, seeing where they are. We know pretty much where they were when they left. And then we're going to start to try to beef up our I&E blocks, things like that, and trying to give the students the extra support they need to bring them back up to the level that they were when they left. We're going to need a little time to do that. I think more than anything is just right now, our teachers, our special ed teachers and our regular ed teachers, I'm sure as well, but I'm in charge of the special ed teachers, are reaching out to these families. Some of them, if not on a daily basis, it can be as much as 3 times a week. The para educators, it's the same thing. We have para educators working with some students almost 4 times a week, 5 times a week, just trying to make sure that they maintain and they're able to complete the assignments and the work that we're asking them to do to give them that support. So, again, when we get everyone back in, even just thinking about what is it going to look like as a school, what is our day going to look like? We don't even know that at this point. But we're working on a lot of different plans moving forward and, just trying to think of all of our options as we start. Even with ESY, George and I came up with 4 different scenarios about what ESY might look like so that we would be prepared no matter what happened. We think, we see the direction it's going, but we are prepared no matter what we're able to do when the time comes.
Yeah, thank you.
Sure.
Sarah or Nancy, do you have any questions for Jenny?
No, my only concern was whether this cut was being too aggressive, and I think Bradley covered that really well with Jenny. Thank you.
Yep, great, thank you. Michelle, who else do you have kind of teed up to give us some information?
So Sean's with us. I'd like him to talk a little bit about the federal support dollars, the CARES dollars that are listed at the very top, that $327,420. And then when he's finished, if Todd has anything he'd like to add, or Byron McCook has anything he'd like to add, I'd like to ask them to join us.
Welcome, Sean. How's the weather there?
Oh, it's beautiful. Beautiful back here.
Good.
Yeah, the CARES Act dollars, we're actually hoping to get some clarification tomorrow on non-public allocations of these funds. We've been going back and forth with state officials, local officials, and there's still not a hard and fast decision on how these funds will be allocated for our 12 non-public schools in the Radnor Township area. So I hope to have more information on that as soon as we receive it. I was going back and forth today with the state title coordinator, and she said there's been some dissension about the initial language and that we would find out more about it tomorrow. So as soon as I hear something definitive about the allocations of the funds, I will certainly pass those along, the information. And in the conflicting information I have read, it's a little bit, it's conflicting. Some of it says it's based off of one formula, another said it's completely different from title formula. So we're just really just trying to get hard and fast definitive information, so we know what's going to go just to Radnor Township and what will need to be allocated for the non-public schools in Radnor Township.
So the bottom line is that that $327,000 that we believe is being allocated to our school district, a portion at minimum will go to our non-pubs in a similar way that we do with Title I funding. The question is that percentage a little larger because it's a more broadly interpreted to go beyond just what has been the normal non-public schools that we have worked with, and everybody in the state is waiting on that guidance right now. So just
we
like
couldn't necessarily count on that amount, in other words.
We can't count on that total amount. That is exactly, we're sure that total amount is not going to be all going to our school district. Roughly the percentage, I don't know, Sean, if you know off the top of your head, with our Title I dollars that we get each year, a percentage goes to non-pubs. A lot of it depends. It varies each year based on those non-pubs are surveyed based on their, free and reduced, their poverty rates is how that is determined. Do you know, Sean, off the top of your head, what percentage roughly we would give each year or on a given year?
I mean, I can only speak in the time I've been here. The dollars we received this year, it's a relatively low amount in the past, at least over the last couple of years I've looked back on. So if the formula is the same for the CARES Act, then I think it'll still be a relatively low amount. If the formula comes back and it's somewhat different, then we might be looking at a different scenario. Some of the documentation I read that was out of Washington, D.C. was looking at like a 90% for the school district and a 10% potentially for the non-publics. But again, that was speculative based off of who knows how many non-public schools. We have 12. Based off of this year's data, none of the 12 non-publics had students who would meet criteria for free and reduced population. So,
and the question will be now: will many more with the situation we're in meet the criteria? We don't know, and that's something that changes each year.
Yeah. So I wish I had more hard and fast information on that number. I was told today from the state representative who handles federal programming that we would find out tomorrow.
And don't hold your breath on that, because we were told originally we would find out Friday, and now it's Wednesday, so we don't know when we'll get the answer from that. But thank you, Sean. I know you've been really bird dogging this.
Again, I wish I had better information right now. We're just kind of holding off and waiting for that formula. And again, it's been very conflicting. Some of the information has said one thing and the others have said the other. So, and
this conversation of those federal dollars is very symbolic of, I would say, all of the items on the chart. There is on each one of the items, just like we talked about the substitutes, maybe it won't come to fruition. There are different areas where we think we can be a little bit more solid on. Certainly the use of fund balance dollars and our willingness to commit, but it becomes a question of how far, how much of our fund balance dollars do we want to use in order to balance the budget this year is really where I think our conversation, centers around. But there are different pieces that we've put in there that, we're not sure if it'll work out the way we anticipate.
Okay, great. Does anybody have any questions for Sean, Sarah, Nancy, Bradley? Well, I thank you, Sean. I know that as soon as you get that number, we'll be anxiously awaiting hearing what it is. Michelle, did you have anybody else you wanted to specifically kind of tee up?
So I just would ask Dr. McCook if he has anything he wanted to add regarding his technology reductions for this year.
Yes, thank you, Michelle. Hi. I just wanted to mention that the acquisition for the Microsoft Surface Goes for the incoming ninth graders is still in the budget, moving forward for next year. And to reiterate what Superintendent Ken Batchelor said last week, we just want to keep in mind that as we go into the 21-22 school year, we will have to revisit the acquisition of additional technology, because we'll see our first purchases of Chromebooks would have started to age out, as well as some of the older iPads. But I just wanted to just put that placeholder up one more time.
Okay. Well, we have in our budget a transfer for technology. That's within the budget, the overall budget. What is it, about 1.5 million, Michelle?
It is. It was 1.5 million. It's actually been reduced now by that $270,000, because what we do with the technology is Byron budgets some of his technology in Fund 10, the general fund, but then we also have Fund 15 that's set up, and what we do is from the general fund, we do a budgetary transfer over to Fund 15. So we actually reduced that amount for the technology that was purchased this year out of Fund 15.
All right, great, thank you.
Okay, all right, thank you.
All righty.
So let me just ask Todd if he has anything that he wants to add. And if he does, I'd welcome him to pop up on the screen.
No, I think you took care of everything. The whole team did a great job.
All righty. So, Michelle, just kind of looking at the time and knowing that, you know, we need to kind of wrap our heads around giving some sort of direction. Sarah, Bradley, Nancy, do any of you have any kind of general questions, thoughts, things you'd like to put out there for us to discuss in terms of just, I mean, the columns are all the same. This is really just coming down to, you know, as always, the amount that we're going to be taxing. Bradley, you look like you were nodding there.
Sure, and I saw Nancy was as well. So one question, let me ask just two quick questions that are somewhat unrelated to each other. One is about revenues. I think, Ms. Deco, you're probably familiar with the Pennsylvania Association of School Business Officials put out this document where they used a formula, and it seemed like they applied that formula to every district in the state, looking at the previous recession, and tried to make an estimate of how much of a revenue drop school districts could expect. And their numbers for Radnor were something like between 2.8 million and 3.2 million, which is much more pessimistic than what we're seeing here. So if you could tell us a little bit about what is different about their analysis than your analysis that leads to, you know, somewhat more optimistic numbers on our end. And then the second thing I wanted to ask is, are there any other numbers, any other types of revenues that have not yet been worked into this analysis, whether it's, you know, facility use fees, whether it's payments from other districts when we have students who are, you know, resident here on a temporary basis. You know, there are a few other different line items as I was going through the budget book that I wasn't sure were accommodated here in our estimate of, you know, what revenues, you know, may also go down next year. So those are the two questions I had about what we're looking at right now.
So I am familiar with the report or the article that you're talking about from PASBO, and actually have the document here in front of me. And they did two assumptions. The first assumption for Radnor assumed that we would have a reduction in revenues of $3.3 million. And the second assumption too assumed that it would be $2.8 million in loss of revenue. So PASBO and I basically used the same type of assumption, but PASBO uniformly applied it to every single district across the state. And while I agree with some of their assumptions, I didn't take as aggressive of an approach. So I also went back and looked at Radnor's annual financial report, sometimes referred to as an AFR, for 2007, 2008, and 2008, 2009, which is when we had the last recession. And I didn't see these large reductions that PASBO talks about. You know, they talk about the fact that there could be a reduction in, trying to find my notes here. One second. They talk about the fact that there could be a reduction of 50% in interim taxes next year. Well, I disagree with that. I do definitely think that there's going to be a reduction in interim taxes, but what you have to remember is interim taxes lag approximately 6 months. It takes 2 months at least if someone does an addition or a renovation to their home to get that into the assessment office and get the assessed value to the taxpayer for the taxpayer to review. The taxpayer has 3 months in order to review that and decide whether or not they want to appeal. That's at least 5 months that have gone by, and the district hasn't been notified of it yet. So about 6 months after the initial assessment is, the occupancy permit is approved and the original assessors go out, that's when it gets on our rolls to send out an interim bill. So while I think we'll see a reduction in interim taxes, it's not all going to happen in 2020, 2021. Part of it will happen in 2020, 21, and another part of it will happen in 2021, 22. So that I don't agree with. I agree that we're going to see some reductions in interest. I did reduce our interest earnings. I more than likely will need to reduce them additionally over and above what I reduced them. I reduced them by about $100,000. And I reduced the transfer taxes. Now, transfer taxes, again, those are some things that lag behind. So we get those transfer taxes, we get them behind. So what we received in the month of April was very comparative to what we've received in previous months. So we haven't seen with the COVID closure what is really going to happen with the transfer taxes. And I won't see that before we have to approve our final budget. So I did make a reduction to the transfer taxes. I think that more than likely will probably need to be reduced a little bit more as well. So while I agree with a lot of the things that PASBO put forth in that report, I think in some cases their timing is off. And when I looked at what happened between 2007, 2008, and 2008, 2009 in Radnor, I didn't see those big reductions. I saw that the real estate taxes dipped a little bit, but not significantly like they said they were going to. And I didn't see huge decreases in interim taxes or transfer taxes. But again, transfer taxes at that time were considerably lower than what they have been the last couple of years. So I hope that answers your questions, Bradley. And then you did ask about what other revenues we haven't, may not have taken into account. I decided to leave the revenues for facility rentals the same as they had been. It had been pretty consistent, and while I think we may see a dip, I think we'll see that recover again. I don't think that we'll see a reduction in terms of tuition that students are paying, or for students who might be attending through a pilot or a payment in lieu of tax agreement. I don't think we'll see big reductions there. We may see an influx of students who attended public or private schools who are now going to be attending public schools because perhaps maybe their family has had a little bit more of a financial hardship and may not be able to afford that going forward.
Right, thank you.
You're welcome.
Nancy, you had some questions?
Yeah, to start off with a comment, I think as a first-year board member going through this budgeting process for the first time, it's almost a trial by fire. All these uncertainties, I think none of us really signed up for this. So kudos to everyone who's done all the work that they have on this budget and identifying, ways that we could balance it. I have had a lot of questions, but through the course of the day, I've had a lot of them answered. Thanks so much, Michelle, for some of your time. One question I did have, and it's probably, I only ask this just given this time of uncertainty that things are pretty flexible these days, but I noticed in looking at the budget with the big lump sum amounts, knowing that benefits represents a lot. And I'm not saying to change anything with benefits, but it's a 6% increase over this academic year. And I don't know if there's any opportunity to open up discussions with some of these benefit providers. It could be a moot point, but I just thought it was such a big increase, and just under the circumstances of what we're all going through, maybe there may be some slight opportunity there. Todd, I don't know if you have any information on that.
Could you repeat that? You're breaking up on me if you could, Nancy.
Sure. I was just looking at big pockets within the budget, and I noticed that benefits represents a large portion of our budget, and I saw it increased over this past year by 6%. So under the circumstances, normally you wouldn't have a chance or opportunity to go back because we have entered into contracts with these benefit providers. But under the circumstances, do you think there may be an opportunity to renegotiate with these companies?
For our medical and prescription, no, because that's actually done through the county-wide system, Delaware County Health Trust. So if the Delaware County Health Trust goes to, since we're self-insured, the rates are basically based on a utilization.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, that wouldn't be any kind of savings, even though it did go up. But it's all based on utilization. The rate is based on 50% of what Radnor uses and 50% of what the trust uses. And then our rates are determined that way.
And Nancy, that's also the same for the dental. The dental is self-insured. So there's really no room to renegotiate there. Some of those increases, again, are related to the retirement PSERS. And so as the retirement rate increases, that also has an increase. But there was also an increase in a couple of other areas, which I think when we present the proposed final budget, you'll see some reductions in the benefit line items. So I'm currently working on moving some of those things around and taking into account some shifts that we have where teachers are moving from, the teachers are tiered in terms of how they pay for their healthcare benefits. So if they're in the first tier, they pay a little bit less percentage, second tier, and then a third tier. So people that are moving from one tier to another tier, which hadn't been taken into account when we did that draft budget back in December and January. So we'll see some reductions in terms of what the district is being expected to pay for benefits.
Okay. And a lot of the other questions that I had, one was based on revenue, but you answered it with Bradley's question. And I think that's it for now. Thank you.
Sarah, do you have questions?
I did have a couple questions. I want to clarify, because I was comparing this sheet to the sheet we got in last month's meeting. The total proposed amount that you're proposing to take from the retirement rate stabilization fund, which we have also called the retirement escrow account, is 800,000. It's the 500 at the top plus 300 here, and it was 675 last time, but you're proposing that we increase what we take from that escrow account if we need it.
That's correct. And the reason why we went with the increase, the rationale behind that was that we had anticipated in this current budget year, 2019-20, that we would be using $800,000 of that retirement rate stabilization fund to balance the budget. And because of the closure and everything else, we don't anticipate that we're going to need to use that. So since we were anticipating using it in 19-20, we're suggesting that we use it in 2020-21.
Two more questions. Well, maybe three. What you mentioned that the 500,000 of that retirement is netted against our bond funding. I just wanted to understand what you meant by that.
So when I said that I put on there the scenarios down at the bottom and the changes from the original document, the $500,000 is a reduction in revenues that you're seeing. But actually the reductions in revenues were 1,300,000, little bit more thousand. What I did was I took the bond savings from the two bond refundings that we did for 2019A and 2019B. Since we had the PDE approval letters now I took those savings into consideration. It was just over $800,000. So I netted those two numbers together.
Okay. So then I guess, well, two things. One, I don't know, I raised the issue about Sandy Hill and this kind of being the first time it was mentioned publicly. Did we manage to get out a letter or some kind of communication to the rising eighth graders' parents today about that?
No, we have not gone out a letter to anyone to communicate it. You know, until we make that decision that, you know, this is a change we want to make. You know, I did notice there was, you know, the public comment about, you know, Camp Sandy Hill, and we have two trips. We have Camp Sandy Hill that costs us about $40,000, and then we have Camp Canadensis for our fifth graders at the end of the school year. That costs the districts roughly $20,000, I believe, Michelle, if I have my numbers right. And we have put on the, you know, on the table all different programs, and we have looked at so many different programs. The reality of, you know, this September, just much like our public commenter said, of us sending a group of kids camping all together in close quarters, we don't believe is likely. And the idea of, we've lived that world of trying to reschedule it and the challenges of trying to reschedule it, that we think this is, you know, unfortunately would be a year we would step away from that. While we recognize the, you know, the traditions that are there, we recognize that many of our teachers who work so hard to make that program happen for our kids, you know, we have to start looking at different areas, and we're in this spot every year where we can make some cuts and reductions each year. And it just seemed logical this year, based on what we're living with this virus, with September, that this would be a, you know, a cut that we could make this year.
Okay. It's not a huge number either. I mean, if something changed dramatically by September, we may be able to find other monies that would cover that, or we could technically use general fund for that if we really decided we wanted to.
We certainly could. We could look to use general fund to it. We could certainly look to, you know, do we want to bring that back in the spring if things change dramatically? Do we want to bring it back the following year? Do we want to take some time during the school year to look at the overall program? You know, much of it had to do with the opportunity because of the unfortunate situation of the virus, and would be sending all of our kids camping in the fall. If things change dramatically, I mean, you know, will we be sending kids camping in the spring? I don't know. You know, I'm not going to commit to that either right now.
No, and I would say, I know when the eighth graders, when we had to move it from the fall to the spring, I know the teachers complained a lot that it didn't fall in the right time in their curriculum, and they were frustrated with having moved it to the spring. So I'm not saying it's a bad proposal or even a bad decision if the board goes that way. I just wanted to make sure that we are mindful of the fact that some members of the public may be hearing that for the first time.
Yeah.
Or hearing that it's a proposal, obviously isn't finalized. So the last question I had was about the capital projects reserve fund. I mean, I think from what I can tell from the January board book, it looks to me like in prior years, we've been putting about $2 million in the capital projects reserve fund. Is that right, Michelle? I mean, it's been 2 something to 2.9 even. And this budget doesn't propose anything. I'm not saying there's no money for capital projects, but I just wanted, that seems like a really big change. I mean, and magnitude much bigger from what we've done in the past.
So let me just grab my book here and I can tell you, Sarah.
I can't give you the page number because I have the actual paper book, but from the January one, it was the last page under the summary by function and major object tab. And it's the capital, it's 5230, the capital projects funds transfers.
So actually, when you look at that report combines several transfers all together.
Okay.
So it's a little confusing. You need to look at the detailed report.
Okay.
And the detailed report, if you look at page 295 on the detailed report, which is really basically the second to last page.
Yep. Okay.
It's about 2/3 of the way down, and you can see capital reserve transfer.
Yes.
So in 2017-18, we transferred from our general fund, which is Fund 10, over to Fund 32, which is the Capital Reserve Fund,
Okay.
695,000.
Okay.
In 18-19, we transferred 1,275,795. And the reason why there was such a big jump between those 2 years is because we were beginning to fund the bleachers over multiple years. And then for 19-20, which is the current budget year, we transferred 479,527. And then if you look under the 2020-21, you'll see that there is a zero there. So there's nothing
Right.
included in there for a transfer.
Right.
So it's roughly about $860,000 on average over those couple of years.
Okay.
That
And,
we had
and even just
transferred.
$500,000. Yeah.
And so there had been years when we transferred substantially more than that. People will probably remember there was a year when we were working on the Wayne and Eisen renovations and we transferred $6 million. That was planned for over a period of time and multiple years, and then it was all transferred at one point in time. So there are some years where we have really large transfers, depending on how we've been trying to pay for projects. And there's some years where we have very small amounts. And if you look at what's in our general fund, fund balance, you'll probably remember that we have committed or assigned fund balances for various things like the rate stabilization, ERIP and compensated absences, the technology fund, and the curriculum, the teaching and learning budget. And then we've also got an assigned committed fund balance for capital projects. It's in Fund 10, but it has been assigned for capital projects. So that could be used to pay for some of those capital projects in the future if we so choose. And then there's our unassigned fund balance, which can be used for any purpose that you so want. You're limited to how much you can have within that by 8% based on your next year's expenditures.
Okay. And I too was peppering you with questions today, so I appreciate that you made time for all of us.
So was Ken.
Yeah, but you report to so just
Yeah,
because
and mine seem to be the most bothersome. That's interesting.
Just so people know, I mean, we do have, you mentioned this capital projects reserve fund, and I think you told me we have over $6 million in that reserve fund within Fund 10. So it's not, if we pass this budget without allocating more money to that, we're not being irresponsible in not having any money for capital projects. It's there, it's just we're not helping it along this year.
So one of the things we have to be really, it can get a little confusing when we talk about capital reserve and capital reserve funds. So when we're talking about what we have in the general fund, it is a committed fund balance for capital projects.
Right.
It's not over in our capital projects fund, which is Fund 32. It's within Fund 10. So if we decide that we want to put some money into this budget to be transferred over from Fund 10 to Fund 32, we would pick it up as an expenditure, and then we would transfer it over in July, like we do with all the other transfers, like for community swim and our technology and our curriculum. And it would cause us to use more fund balance. Whether we want to use the committed fund balance that's been set aside for capital projects, or if we wanted to use retirement rate stabilization money, or if we wanted to use the unassigned, we would have to have discussions about which pot of money we wanted to take it out of.
Right, but what I think you explained to me was we have Fund 32, and then we have the portion of Fund 10 that's allocated for capital project reserve. And between those two pots of money, we should have almost or around $12 million for capital projects should we need it.
It's a little bit more than $12 million.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Do you, I mean, in an ideal world, if we weren't experiencing what we're dealing with COVID, et cetera, would you be recommending that we put money into that fund given the capital projects we have planned in the future And if so, what would you be telling us to put aside?
So I definitely would be telling you to budget money in Fund 10 to be transferred over to Fund 32. I think it's prudent if you can build that into your regular budget, your general fund budget, to be able to transfer it over. Unfortunately, I can't really tell you how much I would be recommending. I worked on the capital plan last year. I've not worked on it this year. Mark Brooks, who was with us previous, didn't get to it before he left. He was trying to get to it, but he didn't get to it. And unfortunately, Bill and I haven't had a chance to really sit down, and Todd to sit down to go over that. And with building principles being out at this point in time, it would be really difficult in order to do that. I think if you wanted to do something, you could be prudent and transfer exactly what you transferred last year, that $479,000. You could build that into the budget. That would give us a place to start. And then administration could take the months of July, August, September, October, go over that capital plan, get something in place. And if we needed to transfer more money, you have the opportunity to do that after October 1st. The board could do a resolution saying that they wanted to transfer funds from the general fund over and above what was transferred previous into Fund 32. And then you could designate where you wanted to take it out of, either out of the committed fund balance, out of the unassigned. It would need at that point to come out of fund balance. It would not come out of any other place in the general fund. So those are a couple options that we could think about and discuss a little bit more. You have time to take that into consideration. Or, you know, the other option is if you're looking at something less than a tax increase of 2.6, you could tax more if you wanted to do that.
And you know, our capital project list, I mean, this is an ongoing list that has been in place for many years. And it is, you know, it just requires some updating, and also additionally, we continually update it and we want to refine it. We've had a lot of discussions with the high school project about what, you know, are items that are possibly in the high school project. We were having discussions this year that were things that were in that capital funds project list that may now could come off of that capital funds project list, because it will get taken care of with that high school project, the accessibility and wellness. So, you know, it is something that it is looked at and can be easily looked at. And we're also in the midst of a feasibility study. And I think that feasibility study, really the results of that this summer is what's going to inform us as we update that, you know, capital project list. It's really going to be that feasibility study that's taking place right now that's going to help us adjust that list moving forward.
Okay, thank you, Michelle. I appreciate that.
You're welcome.
Well, Michelle, I echo everyone's gratitude for, you know, kind of the work you guys are doing, all the administrators you had come out tonight to answer some questions and give us context around where things are right now. I'm kind of looking at it a little differently. I'm working backwards from, you know, June 30th right now, and thinking about what needs to happen between now and June 30, when the date by which we must have passed a balanced budget. And ideally, we won't be waiting until June 30 because you need to get the tax bills ready. So, you know, we've got a certain amount of information tonight. Some of it's based on, a lot of it's based on assumptions. Some assumptions are a little bit more solid than others. And we are going to have a special board meeting next Tuesday night, and we'll have the full board there, and we will get a budget presentation. It will look different from this. Kind of off the top of the head, what I'm thinking, you know, might be different is, you know, hopefully by then Sean will have been able to ascertain what the federal support dollars actually will be, and which that's something. And administration will have an opportunity to kind of take some of the questions or thoughts and perspectives that we shared tonight or asked tonight, and see if that changes, you know, any of the things that you might do to close the budget. take into consideration this conversation about whether or not to do a fund transfer for capital. I mean, the blessing in disguise of where we are right now is that we have undertaken, the facilities committee has undertaken, and we authorized as a board, the feasibility study. So we actually have some experts out there right now gathering information about the kind of the state of all of our buildings. And that information is supposed to be coming to us, Sarah, sometime late summer, early fall, hopefully. She's nodding yes. So, you know, that information from that report will hopefully inform the work of Bill Dolan, who I see is on the screen or is here joining our meeting. And, you know, Bill, I know the timing of all this, we're asking an awful lot of you right now, and thank you so much. You know, between the infrastructure project, getting our transportation center, you know, building up and completed, and then, yes, taking on working with our outside consultant about the feasibility study and translating that in some fashion, working with the administration into a prioritized long-term capital plan, capital maintenance plan. One of the things that I don't personally like is that we keep calling it capital projects, capital projects. A lot of this is, you know, facilities maintenance. And we are always going to have costs associated with facility maintenance. You know, we do upgrades, we do enhancements, we've done construction, we have done those things, but year in and year out, we should be expecting to spend money on facility maintenance. And so, you know, Bill, maybe with an eye toward kind of viewing it that way, you'll have this information from the feasibility study, and in the fall, we can re-examine that. But some of the big decisions we need to, you know, make now are, do we want to put some money in the budget toward, you know, allocating towards the capital fund. The other information that's kind of not here, so I'm looking towards next week and hoping there's some numbers that are going to be refined. And I'm also, don't need to answer this tonight, but one thing that we are typically talking about at this time of year as it relates to the budget is, do we have any retirements? And we haven't really heard about retirements. Now, I'm not sure if we would never be talking about the specifics of who the people are at this stage, but, you know, generally by this time of year, human resources and the administration have a sense of, are we going to have retirements? And that is sometimes where we find some cost savings. You know, it would be good to hear an update next week of if that is in fact something that might be at play for the budget. And then, you know, so kind of philosophically, the budget items that you're using to close the gap are consistent among all 5 columns of the chart. So really what we're talking about as a board and what we need to be thinking about as a board over the next week is, what level of tax increase are we comfortable with enacting? And next week will be our time to vote on a proposed final budget. Now, I think operationally, Michelle, really what we're trying to do is give ourselves 30 days notice, because we have to publish our proposed final budget for 30 days before we then enact our final budget, and then Michelle can print up the tax bills and all of that. I'm looking at the calendar and thinking, if we're doing a proposed final on May 19th, then to meet the 30-day mark, we either have to have a board meeting, a special board meeting on Thursday, June 18th, or wait until Tuesday, June 23rd to do a special board meeting to pass the final budget. And, you know, that might be something for us to talk about, the pros and cons of that next week, and let administration and have an opportunity to discuss, do they want to consider a special board meeting on a special night, or is the 23rd workable to give the 30-day window, and then still give Michelle and her staff an opportunity, you know, it's a week, to print the bill. But all of these numbers are predicated on obtaining from the state our funding at the 2019-2020 funding levels. And you know, a number of us spent the day yesterday in our, you know, PSBA advocacy day, speaking with our local representatives, Senators Leach and Representatives Vitale and O'Mara, you know, pleading with them to please, you know, keep our funding at the 1920 levels. And we don't actually know that yet, that that's going to happen. And so I'm looking at the deficit across the top and thinking, okay, that assumes state funding is level at this current year. And I don't think we're going to have that information by next week. So for me personally, you know, and I'm thinking about our collective bargaining agreements, which are, you know, which were negotiated in good faith on our part and on the part of our employees, and to rely upon that. And I know that our collective bargaining agreements, you know, are around what the Act 1 index is. Some are a little higher in some years, some are a little lower. I also know that, well, I don't know, but I fully expect us to see a dip in the Act 1 index next year. I fully expect it. Now, maybe it will have a delay of 2 years, but I could see it coming as soon as next year. And then the other piece that we have at play is, of course, the Delaware County reassessment, which happens to be specific to the school districts here in Delaware County. Those are a lot of big numbers and a lot of big unknowns that in fairness to our administration and in fairness to our kids who need public education and will need it next year even more than ever, you know, I think I know that I will be personally advocating for a tax increase that is probably pretty close to the index. It is what we are allowed to do by law. It is, it preserves as much flexibility for right now as we can possibly manage. I know that that will be difficult for some people in our town, and I'm so sorry for that. But I also know that preserving the quality of education in Radnor is going to help preserve their real estate value, and that's an important thing that they need now as well. So, you know, I'm saying all this not because we're going to give you any particularly strong guidance tonight, although I welcome, you know, kind of hearing Nancy and Bradley's and Sarah's thoughts on that. I'm coming at this from, I believe this is my 7th budget. Nancy, it feels like trial by fire, and it's my 7th budget. So your feelings are well earned there. I can't ever remember a time where I feel like there were so many things that were unknown. And even the other things that we're assuming that, you know, we're not going to have a whole lot more kids coming in the door in the fall, and we might. Or we might, you know, there's any number of possibilities. I don't want to go on other than to say, I think, you know, unless the committee disagrees, I think, you know, we need to be planning on, you know, tasking the administration with our proposed final budget next week. And Ken, unfortunately, I mean, we may need to have kind of 3 versions or a couple of versions there to then put forth one as our proposed final and do our 30 days and then move toward final budget adoption in June. Does that kind of, did I sum up kind of all the things that I feel like are there to be said? There's probably more. You're nodding your head, so I guess you agree.
Yes, I think you have, and we can bring that forward next week, you know, and realize that at the board meeting next week with the entire board, you know, we need to land somewhere, and we need to land at a proposed final budget that we can vote on, but that can be part of the discussion that we have next week.
Michelle, I just want to queue up before I hear kind of quickly from the other 3. We have run way over, but you know, this is really important. We needed to get to this tonight. There's no 2 ways about it. Does June 23rd feel like it's a manageable date for you in order to turn around and get the tax bills done? Have you even thought about how you're getting the tax bills done with distance, you know, with social distancing? How's that timing?
we actually had the discussion and we decided the copier is a lot freer in the district office than ever. So that there will be, we can actually go up to the wire a little closer because there's less people in the office trying to get to the copier. I mean, I say that jokingly, but it's true.
Yeah,
So,
that is absolutely true.
Okay. No, I'm just saying to my
But the
calculation,
23rd can work. The 23rd can work. We've talked about that, right, Michelle? You're good with the 23rd.
And the 23rd can work. And like we said, you know, the copier is free. We can get the bills printed. There's nobody there that you have to wait to get done doing their copies. So that will work fine. And then we can roll out a plan to send tax bills home with people to be stuffed and ready to go the first of, you know, that last week of June, the beginning of July.
Okay. Well, I'm going to open it up kind of quickly to the board. I know we've gone way over time. Mr. Petiti, I know you're listening. I apologize. We're cutting into your GRCC meeting. But, you know, kind of Sarah, Nancy, Bradley, is there anything that I shared as kind of an overview that lands for any of you a particular way? Please feel free to chime in.
The one concern I have with sending all 5 options to the full board is that the meeting may, I think it might be helpful if we, you know, would propose, you know, 2 or 3 at least, as opposed to leaving it all open. But I defer to your, you know, experience and Michelle's, if you think it's important to share all 5 with the board and leave all, I mean, all those options would be open anyway, but I just feel like this just leaves open a real spectrum of decisions, and especially based on the fact that, you know, a big amount of our funding is from the state and we don't know whether that's all coming next year.
Okay. Nancy or Bradley, don't feel compelled, but feel free to chime in.
Yeah, Ms. Stern, you captured a lot of my own feelings, so I don't see any need to belabor the point. The way I would put it is, I'm at 2.6% because of all of the uncertainty. I'm at the index level until it's shown otherwise. And we have to be responsible stewards of this school district. And if there's a way to go under 2.6% responsibly, fine, but I haven't heard it yet because of all the uncertainty. This could be the most uncertain budget that the Radnor Township School District has ever done, given everything that's going on in the world. So we'll have a lot more to talk about next week, and that's where I stand for now.
Okay.
I more or less concur with everything that has been said. And I think even with the 2.6, with the unknowns, with the state funding, as well as what we as a district are going to look like in the fall, which we still are figuring out day to day, I think that would be the most responsible at this point. Not ideal for everyone, obviously, and apologize for that. But as you said, Susan, with the wanting to make sure that we continue offering the best education that we can in our township. So.
And we can always do something later on. Once if things get better, we need to make a budget that's responsible for next year. And if things get better, we can always do something less in future years.
Okay. All righty, Michelle, so thank you. I think as a back pocket, I guess the only other thing I will say is a back pocket daily, weekly, our board is advocating hard, and we are speaking with legislatures every time it comes up. There continues to be bills out there being floated to, compel us to do a 0% tax increase. And I think, we're fighting hard against that. There's no 2 ways about it. I think, if that were to actually happen, we're not, we'd be talking about just, really using fund balance. That's where that would be. I guess I would say leaving that out there as a possible option, not because any of the 4 of us think it's the right thing, but because that could potentially be taken out of our hands. But I agree with Sarah. I think 5 is probably a bit overwhelming, and it sounds like you have some support at around the, at the index. So I'll leave it to you and Ken you know, maybe we can have a conversation about what a pared down list of options might look like. Okay?
Sounds good.
All right, good. So our final agenda item is, do we have any new business? And then, Mr. Petiti, do we have any public comment?
No public comment.
All righty. Again, with apologies to you for your late start on GRCC. I'm going to thank everybody, and I'll call the meeting adjourned. Good night, everyone.